Hello,
Hi, Karina.
how are you?
I'm fine, and I'm so excited to be here with you.
I'm so excited to have you here. I think that you're my first repeat guest from the
Mm.
last round that we did of the Big Crone Energy podcast. So I'm super glad to have you back. And I think today we wanted to talk again about fiber arts, building community. And because you're in Germany, Margit, I'm going to ask you some questions at some point in this recording about your view of the United States from Germany and any tips and pointers you want to give us. Because I think it's super important that we not avoid that hard topic in this podcast, and a perspective from an outside person who's not a news broadcaster, I think is also really, really important. Yeah. No
Yeah.
filters.
No filters. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And thank you for having me again. And it's been quite a while, and lots of things have happened since we talked here the
Yeah.
last time.
You know what hasn't changed? My lighting is my lighting still sucks. I have like so much light pouring on my face, and yet I am still ahead in the darkness. But I'm gonna ignore it and just keep going because it's more about what we're saying than how we
Yeah,
look.
that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Margaret, some years ago, you started a business, a small business in your backyard and in your house, dyeing natural fiber yarn with natural plant dyes. And so, talk to me a little bit about how that has progressed over the years, how you've built community, why natural dyes, why fiber arts. Just tell us your story. And also, in that time period, you and I have both grown older. Margaret and I have known each other since we were in our 40s, 30s, maybe. Long time now. In that time period, we've both grown older, and, we're facing the realities of age, of being Crohn's, in that you've recently lost both of your parents and how that's impacted you. So I just want you to talk. I just want you to tell us stories, and I'll chime in and go off on a tangent like I do, and come back. Yeah.
Yeah, so I started Alte Künste, which translates to ancient arts, in 2011. That is 14 years ago. That was 14 years ago. And I'm like, wow, time flew by. Why that? In hindsight, it's like it could not have been anything else. But when I tried to look at it in sequence, I was dyeing yarn has never been my hobby. I have not dyed yarn until the moment I decided this could be a business for me.
Mm,
Because I was desperately looking for a way out of the office job I had at that time,
right.
or not just at that time. This being Germany, I've had this job since I left university with a PhD in economics.
Hmm.
And I worked at an international bank,
Hmm.
and it was eating my soul.
I remember.
It got to, and yeah, we've known each other by then, and I was in one of your coaching trainings.
Hmm.
And I remember when I said, I'm going to do this. I have this idea. I worked in museums on weekends in my
Hmm.
spare time. My husband being a craftsman and a smith who can do smithy traditionally. So we were often in museums and he was showing off how this works. And not just the smith. I actually don't know the English word. It's Mollenhauen. It's before you were using a drill and you wanted to produce a wood bowl.
Hmm.
You would have to chop it by hand with a little chisel.
Yeah.
And there's a certain word in German, Mollenhauen, which even Germans don't know that that's what it means. And he was doing these things. So I was around all the time talking with the museums people and looking what they did. And that's how I encountered dyeing with botanical and natural dyes.
Hmm.
And I loved the colors. They are completely different from synthetic colors.
Yes.
They look far more vibrant. And eventually I thought, why? And I started knitting again. I knitted in my teenage years, and
Hmm.
then I stopped when I started university and working. And when I moved out here in the country with my husband, our heating system failed I moved in November, and by January we had way below freezing temperatures and the heating system went belly up.
Oof.
Oop, yeah.
Yeah.
And somewhere in my mind, a memory came up and said, you need to knit socks now. Get warm, knit
Hmm.
socks. And in my lunch break, I went to a craft shop and bought knitting needles and sock yarn. And that's how I started knitting. And then I was in the museums thinking, why do I have only industrial dyed yarn when there are so lovely colors in botanical dyes?
Right.
And everybody was like, yeah, it's not going to work. People won't like it. You know, the light fastness. And I was like, yeah, but we all know in the museum area, we all know which plants die light fast and which don't. So you just don't use the not light fast ones.
Right.
So in the end, I
And
thought,
so light
well,
fast means
it
they,
means the color does not, light fast means the color does not fade in daylight.
okay. And what about when you
So
wash?
like
What about when you wash?
that's called wash fast. And yeah,
Okay.
light fastness is more critical than wash fastness.
Right.
Just don't use bleach and don't use heavy industrial soap.
Yeah.
Use natural soap, use soap for wool or for silk.
Mhm.
Perfect. When you buy my yarn,
Right. Right.
if you get a low quality dye that is not light fast or wash fast, it will fade and it doesn't fade ov overall. It can
Hmm.
get blotchy
Hmm.
and that's really annoying. Yeah. So I was thinking of a way out of my office job and of gaining my soul back.
I remember
And I
so
thought, I'm gonna try
well.
this.
Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
well
I
those conversations. But I always remember when I came to visit you and we had this lovely weekend. I don't know, maybe that was the weekend we were in Heidelberg, maybe. I don't remember. But I was staying at your house, so it wasn't Heidelberg. It was at your house with Holger. And it was Monday morning. My flight was leaving. I was waiting for you by the door. And this woman came down the stairs that I didn't recognize because she was all ready to go back into the corporate world, right?
yeah,
And your whole energy was different. The way you moved your body was different. The sharpness of your tone was different. And I thought, who, who is this person? Right? Like comparatively to who I had spent the last many days with, right? I did not recognize you. It was a moment of I don't know, like I was confused, right? Because I had known this part of you that was not all buttoned up like that, right? And I'm not being insulting at all. It was just fascinating to watch that you had put on this suit, right? And your outside persona got buttoned on with the suit, you know?
it's an armor. It was
Yeah.
like you put on the suit and it's an armor, and you put on the mask
Yes.
and that's it. And nobody gets at you.
Yes. And I remember doing the same thing for the many years that I worked as a nurse, right? When I put on my scrubs, when I put on my name tag and tied up my shoes, my white shoes, that then I was who I was as a nurse, you know, my legal name at that time plus, my credentials, and that was how. And so it was a also like a magical persona, a protective device so as not to be wounded by that kind of work. Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
What I remember I wasn't aware of that until you told me when I had it all planned and things were rolling in that way that this was going to happen. You said to me, you've that I went from I have to do this for another 12 years before I can get out to I'm quitting within 4 weeks.
Yeah, working with me can have that effect on people.
But the important part is it did work. It wasn't a crazy thing to do.
No,
It was not,
we're
it was
moving.
my decision. It was my plan. And it worked out the way, well, of course, there are always things that don't work out as planned, but the business is running and I'm still here.
When we're making big transformational moves in our lives, um, we're moving towards something better, or we're moving towards something more authentic. I've worked with
Yeah.
lots of people, and it's like, I'm going to stay married to him until the kids are grown, right? Or I'm going to stay in this job until, you know, whatever, I get the next promotion, and then I'll save my money, or until I get my retirement. And for some folks, that's the right thing to do, right? I'm never here to like convince anybody to do anything they don't want to do, right? Or they're not ready to do, or it doesn't make sense to them to do it. But that transformational leap that you took was such a huge transformation, right? And I just love the way over time that that's who you are, and you don't have to be somebody else, and you don't have to put on a suit of armor, right? And that the work that you're doing now is magical, creative, in community, building community, and so much less isolating, right, than being in that office environment.
The fun part, the irony here is that in the office, there were always people around me,
Yeah.
but it was completely isolated.
Yes.
And here I work most of the time in the dye room where
Hmm.
I'm on my own,
Hmm.
but I'm not alone and I'm not isolated.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah,
It's so
what
interesting that
really happened.
in the last few podcasts that I've done, the topic of weaving, right, always comes up somewhere in the discussion, right? Whether we're unraveling untruths and complicated oppressive systems or ideas within ourselves, or we are weaving something anew with that pile of unraveled thread, yarn. And it just keeps coming up. So much so that, I found this old chant, and I'm gonna have to find the original artist and ask permission to use it as the intro outro for Big Crone Energy. I kind of stole it a couple podcasts ago. But the weaving and the mending and the connection with the fates, the connection the with being elderly, right? In our culture, right? When I was growing up, only old people knitted, right? But they taught me to knit and crochet. And now it's across the board, right? It's across my 28-year-old is doing some kind of hand knitting, hand weaving thing.
Mhm.
They don't use any tools, but they're making things using yarn and their hands and learning to spin wool. And so I would love it if you would help, sort of help us with your vast knowledge, because I know you have studied and practiced with those old systems and those old traditions of the old women weaving. And if you could, whatever it is that you want to talk to about that, it's always
Yeah.
fascinating to hear you.
We think of weaving, spinning, crocheting, knitting as an old woman's craft, but actually before we had industrialized communities,
Hmm.
people were always under pressure to produce. fiber, yarn, cloth, because without without preparing the wool or the flax to produce a thread,
Hmm.
the spinning part, the preparing first for spinning, then the spinning, then you have a thread, then you have to ply it or not ply it, then the weaving or the knitting or the crocheting. All this was necessary before a single piece of cloth could be made.
Right.
And that's why, not because people were poor, but there was no other way
Right.
to get a piece of cloth, be it for clothing or for tapestry or a tablecloth or a dishcloth or a sail for a boat
Right.
or a cover on a wagon. It
Right.
all needed to be spun and woven first or knitted,
Hmm.
depending on what it was. And
Hmm.
that what isn't done within a few minutes. It takes many, many hours. And it meant that people would be spinning or knitting, not the weaving, but the spinning or the knitting whenever they had nothing in their hands. And
Right.
that also meant, for example, while walking. You walk from the farmhouse to the fields. You herd the sheep. You herd the cows or the goats. You were walking and you had hands and then you were spinning because it needed to be produced.
Yeah.
And if you didn't produce it, there were no clothes, there were no cloth, there was nothing for weaving. So people were actually under a lot of pressure to constantly produce yarn
Hmm.
or threads. But that also meant that it would be done all the time.
Hmm.
And it was among the very first things humanity invented. The first clothing was mostly leather,
Yeah. Animal
skin,
health.
or depending on your climate, large plant leaves.
Hmm.
But you need to have something as a thread. And there it starts. The very first thread probably were like animal intestines, not
Sinew.
intestines,
Yeah.
the sinews, right?
Yeah.
Exactly, that's the word. And with plant fibers, when you beat certain plants, you get very strong in fibers from the inside. Those can be used. And then it's not very far from there to the plying, the spinning, the rubbing it together, and then you develop a thread.
Yeah.
And then people, well, it's not just people, it's old women. When you sit at a wake, somebody's ill, you sit at their bed
Yeah.
and you would be spinning
Yeah.
or knitting.
Yeah.
Somebody is really ill, you would be sitting there and you doing nothing meant you would use your hands to spin and weave. Well,
Right.
weave only if there's something to weave around.
Right.
And when we were sitting with my dying parents, I also said, this is the actual what used to be awake when you have modern medicine, modern hospital situations, or even at home. Well, not in a hospital, people are hooked up to all the machinery
Right.
when they're dying, mostly. And then you know exactly this is the official moment of death. But when you have somebody at home dying, which we had, we were sitting there for 3 days.
Right.
And I told my husband, look, this is what awake is actually for. Because you sit there and it's a stretch of time where it's clear where the end will be,
Yes.
but you have no monitors that tell you this is the moment. And even this is the moment is only a technical definition. We don't know what the real moment is.
Right.
It could be after the technical moment or before.
Right.
So sitting there and waiting and holding hands with dying people, this is when historically people would be weaving, knitting, spinning, because it's waiting.
Right.
And we can tell stories and talk, but there's also a point where there's no when words are not enough anymore. And
Right.
then we are silent, and then we're sitting in the silence, and then you hear the clicking or the whizzing sound of a spinning wheel,
Yeah.
or when you prep the fiber, that there are sounds all the time. And this speaks to something very deep in our memory, in
Yeah.
our cellular memory. I was once at a pagan gathering. It was like mostly young people. I was young. We were in like our 20s, late 20s. And a few of us, two or three, had spinning wheels along. And in the evening, when everybody gathered, we were like, well, we can move the spinning wheels away. And it was really funny because all the guys suddenly were like, oh no, please wait. Could you just keep doing that? That's so soothing. And I thought, yeah,
Wow.
none of them had any relation to doing anything with fiber, but some in the animal part of their brains said, we know this.
Yes.
And we know this in the environment we are in, and it's supposed to calm us down. And all the everyday background noise falls off. And when I spin or when I knit, I sometimes say I'm a nicer person when I knit. Because there's a part of my brain that is occupied when I do the knitting.
Right.
And I sometimes call it the monkey part of my brain
Yep.
that is occupied. And then something deeper can come up
Yes.
and other thoughts can come up. And I think for people who don't knit or who don't spin, but sit next to someone who does, that can have the same effect on them. And
Mhm.
since the pandemic, I have an online, we call it an online stitch and bitch. It's an online meeting like Zoom with people who want to sit together and knit or spin. And some people don't, but they still come along for years now. And I
So
don't
they
push
come,
them
but
out.
they don't knit or spin.
Yeah, but
Wow.
they want the company.
Yes.
They come for the company, they come for listening to nice stories or hearing about knitting or
Hmm.
just having a community to go to where they are not pushed to live up to some expectations. Yeah. And I see this
Beautiful.
the same thing as the guys sitting at the pagan gatherings asking us to keep on spinning. This is the same, the people coming to the online gathering who just want to have a community where they are valued for just being there.
Yes. Yeah. Beautiful. And how big is that community now that meets?
So the it's German. So this is
Right.
all restricted to a German speaking area
Hmm.
or German speaking people. So I do this if everything works out with my own schedule, I do it twice a week. Sometimes if my schedule is tight, it's only once a week, but I keep it going.
Hmm.
Um, if we're just really few people, maybe just 6 or 8 show up.
Uh-huh.
If we're a big group, 20, 25 show up.
Hmm.
But the invitation list has, I have an active invitation list that has about 100 people on it.
Nice.
And I and when the invitation list hits towards like 160 upwards, then I look through who's really coming, or at least who has opened the invitation in the last 6 months or
Right.
so.
Right.
And I always email everybody and say, if you don't get any further invitations, and for whatever technical reasons you're not registered, just contact me and you're on the list again.
Right. Right.
So I wanted this to be really a low level entry thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in this group, the only thing is just show up. You're not presenting anything. You're not performing. You're not teaching. You're
No.
just, it's just a knitting circle of
Yeah.
people sitting together and doing their handiwork or just sitting together and having a cup of tea.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
love that.
I started this when the first lockdown happened
Hmm.
in March 2020. So we almost have our 5-year anniversary next week. Well, when I
Feels
had
like
the
a
horrid
hundred
office
years
job,
ago. It feels like a hundred
when I
years
still
ago.
had the horrid office job, at one point I was working in business continuity management, nice phrasing for crisis management. And I had worked with people who were doing pandemic planning. And everybody was like, well, we just hope the real thing doesn't hit during our lifetime.
Yeah.
So I remember it was like January 3rd, and in Germany, the news were like China is building a hospital for 6,000 people within 72 hours, and it's ready for patients. And I turned to my husband and said, if this thing is airborne, not good. Then
Yeah.
we are very bad.
Yeah.
So lockdown came, and I was like, this is not going away within a few weeks.
No.
And there were stitch and bitch knitting gatherings in cafes or restaurants. And it's the same thing. You just show up. You have your tea, your coffee, you eat something, you bring something to knit with you, or you talk with people or you don't, and just sit there and listen.
Hmm.
And I thought this won't happen soon again.
Right.
So I set up this online meeting. And we have people from German-speaking people from all over the world by now.
Oh,
We've
nice.
had people logging in from Japan, from the
Mm.
UK, from South America. It's all fine. Time zone is of course a thing, but it's a low-level entry, and I wanted people to just be able to meet.
Hmm.
And they are happy. They're still coming. They're the in-person meetings have started way back again, but they're still meeting. And even new people contact me when I post every week that we are meeting again.
Hmm.
People still ask to come along
Hmm.
because there are people who are like very old
Yep.
and cannot leave their home easily.
Hmm.
Others live in an area where they have no contact to other knitters.
Right.
And some people just come because they enjoy it.
Right. And they don't want to get dressed and go out. They don't
And
want
they
to.
want to get
It's not that they can't. They
exactly.
don't want to.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's beautiful that that you've created this space for people to gather without having it have to be about
Performance. It's not about
performance
performance.
or attaining a goal or working on something together.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. There's no pressure. There's no living up to any expectations. Okay. The only expectation is be nice to everybody.
Right. Right.
Be nice to people. What be welcoming to everybody who's coming along.
Hmm.
Don't criticize other people. Everybody's struggling.
Indeed. Indeed. And I feel like that's one of the things about growing older is that I don't know, for me, that recognition of like everybody's struggling, right? Everybody's got something going on over here that they may be talking to you about or they may not be talking to you about. And to just try to be more compassionate, just try to be more understanding and maybe don't take everything so personally, you know?
Still, it's important that people even even when everybody's struggling, don't live out your own struggles on everybody else.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seeing that we all struggle doesn't mean we have to put up with other people walking all over us.
No, no,
Yeah.
you know me. I wasn't insinuating that at all. I think that for me, those kinds of people, those kinds of interactions, I just walk away.
Yeah.
Like I just walk away because I've got, my lifespan is getting shorter and shorter and shorter, right? Like that, and time is catching up. And I'm not wasting a single minute of it on people, places, situations, groups that make me feel uncomfortable, disrespected,
Yeah.
unwelcome, and I don't suffer over over the leaving. You know how I used to suffer over the leaving, and I just don't anymore. It's just like, oh, that's not for me, right? That
Yeah.
person is not for me. We are not going to be we're not going to be close friends. We're not even going to be acquaintances, right? And I think that that has to do with aging as well. And it's not about becoming less tolerant. It is about becoming less tolerant, but not around, it's not really about judging the other person. It's about honoring how people make me feel,
Yeah. They
right?
can still do their thing. They can
Like,
still do
go
their
do your
thing that they
thing.
want to do.
Yep.
Yeah. But I'm
Um,
not putting my energy in there anymore.
correct. Correct. So, Margaret, we're about three-quarters of the way through, and I want to get to these hard questions about, we have a white Christian nationalist regime that is People are saying it's the start of the coup, it's the beginning of a coup. I'm like, we've had a coup. The coup has occurred. We're not in the beginning. That we're not they're not moving toward it. It's complete. It was complete on inauguration day. Sorry to be so I'm speaking to my audience now, but like sorry to be so succinct and uncompromising in that. But if we don't understand where we are, we can't help ourselves, right? If we keep waiting for the next big thing to happen, so many big things have happened in these, what is it, 3 weeks? Two weeks? I don't even know. Can't keep track. So it was January 20th, and today, when Margit and I are recording, is February 10th. So 3 weeks. 3 weeks tomorrow, or 3 weeks today. We have non-governmental people going through every office, every committee, every organization in the government, scouring their digital records. And the head of that, which they've called the Doge, which is such an interesting choice of words, on inauguration night through the Nazi salute. And so when,
You emailed me. You
yeah,
emailed me and asked me how we took this here, if we
yeah,
thought this is a Nazi salute. And I sent you back the front page of a national newspaper we have here,
right,
which had a picture of it, of the happening on it. And half of it with the upraised arm was covered because the Nazi salute is illegal in Germany.
illegal. Yeah,
Yeah, well, this being Germany, no swastikas, no Nazi salutes.
yeah. Well, I mean,
Uh,
that should be everywhere. That should be a given.
so yeah, there was no question what it was because they had to cover it.
Yes. Yeah. And he did it twice, right? He did it once toward the camera, and then he turned around and did it once toward the people who were behind him, in the audience behind him. But he was also in Germany later that week rallying the ADF, right? Which is
AFFD.
AFD, sorry, which
Yeah.
is,
They're the Nazis.
yeah.
That is shame. Our local shame. We are 1.5 weeks away from our national elections,
Mm-hmm.
and the estimates are they will get 20% of the votes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I didn't think I would live to see something like that happening. They will not be the largest part. We have a multi-party system,
Right.
so it's not just two or three. There are a lot more parties, but they will come in as second as it looks now.
Wow.
There's and it's I don't get it. I really do not understand it because if even looking at what they write in their party program, it's not in the interest of the people who vote for them.
Right.
But I mean, sounds very similar to the situation you had before your elections.
Yes.
Yeah, people
And,
didn't think.
there are still people who are like 100%. He's our president. We don't care if he's king. We don't want this government anymore, right? And people who will, say things at least online of like, this is exactly what we voted for. This is exactly why we voted for him, having seen what he's done in the last few weeks. It's very interesting in the last 6 weeks or so, remembering you talking to me once about how many Nazis are at the table.
Yeah,
Um,
if there's a table with 10 people and one Nazi comes to join them, there's a table with 11 Nazis. Yeah, this
right.
is something we know this here.
Yes.
And if you mingle too much with the Nazis, you're one as well. And
If you make
I,
space at your table,
yeah,
then you're saying, well, that doesn't bother me.
yeah.
Even if it does
See, I was
bother
in,
you, it doesn't bother you enough to break politeness,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah. We
Um,
also call this in Germany we call this somebody has a problem with their Abgrenzung, how where their personal space ends towards their right. That's an issue here.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it simply means they talk with the Nazis all the time. And some people do say, but we still have to talk with them. I'm like, no, because everybody else who sees me talking with them will lump me in the same bunch with them. And that's not where I want to be. And
Yes.
it does end in the way that people will stop talking to me. And I don't want that,
Yeah.
apart from the point that I don't want to be a Nazi in the first place.
Right. It's so interesting because here in the States, in the last, I would say, since the weekend, maybe Friday, there's been this undercurrent of, well, we have to start building bridges.
No,
And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, we
no.
have to, there's this, the liberals are want to always just want to get along, right?
Yeah,
And they're going to get along to the point where they're Nazis
yeah,
as well, right? You can't talk to these people. They're not going to change their mind. They are
yeah,
not open to being educated. Their identities, right? Their egos, personalities, identities are so enmeshed in the brainwashing, in the cult that they belong to, that anybody thinking that you're going to talk them out of it or be nice to them out of being a Nazi, you're just not seeing it clearly. You're
yeah.
just, you have to, rather than trying to make friends with the opposition, you're much better off making friends with your neighbors,
Hmm.
making friends with the people you go to church with or go to community circles with or go to knitting
Yeah,
circles with or go hunting with or go seed exchanges with or wherever you go. You are much better off putting your efforts there so you
yeah,
can protect each other than
yeah,
you are trying to make nice with people who would just as soon see you dead.
yeah. Let me tell you a story. That was about 20 years ago. My parents were, me, I was a lot younger. My parents were a lot younger. They didn't live with us yet. They were fit enough to live on their own, and they weren't living near me. I was still working the office job,
Mhm.
and I was traveling a lot. I call it the office job, but I was traveling from one, it was like consulting. You had to travel a lot. I lost my cell phone on one of those trips, my private cell phone, and I had it blocked that it couldn't be used anymore. And I went on with my job. I came home for the weekend. I was like, I'll sort this out when I'm back home. But it was the weekend and I didn't care. I would buy a new one the next week. Sunday, the telephone rings. My dad's on the phone and he says, Margit, I know where your cell phone is. And I'm like, Dad, how do you even know that I lost my cell phone? And he says, well, the police called. I was like, what? He said, yeah, the police called and asked me if I have a kid living in the Frankfurt area. And I said, no. I said, what? Yeah. And then he said, well, somebody brought a cell phone here that they found, and the card is already blocked, but the battery is still running. And it says, this is the number of mom and dad. And my dad says, "Ah, now that you say that, that could be my daughter's cell phone." And I was like, Dad, why did you do that? There was dead silence on the phone. And then he answered in the most hurt tone I've ever heard from him was like, I would never hand you over to the police. And that's my dad, born in January in 1930 in Germany. That's what his parents ingrained in him as a kid. You never ever hand anybody over. Never. And that stayed with him till the end of his life. So what you do is you do build community. You see that you have farmers around you, people who keep chicken, grow your own food, know who the healers are, know who the people are who take care of you,
Yeah.
and keep local.
Yeah.
and download those How to Fight the Fascist CIA Handbook.
How to find the fascist what?
No, how to fight, how to be civil disobedience.
Right. If that's an actual book, Margaret, I would love it if you
It
would
is. I
taught me.
saw it on Blue Sky. Somebody posted it yesterday that it's I will look up for
Yeah.
the link and send it to you.
Yeah. And I will post it under this video.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's hard talk, and it's hard talk to
Yeah.
even for me to hear, right? Even though you and I know that you and I have known that this was coming for well over a decade,
And still, we would have hoped it wouldn't have happened. But
and
that's how it is now.
still would hope that it wouldn't happen, right? And still, it's such a weird existence, right? Because I think, oh yeah, I'm gonna redo my floors this spring, and it's like, and then the reality comes in and it says, no, you're not.
Yes, you are, because you wrote this, and I already said this sent this to people here in Germany who are emailing me because they're freaked out about our own elections.
Mhm.
And you wrote this piece that we have to still have fun and still enjoy life because we will burn up if we just are in freak out mode all the time. And we cannot
Mhm.
act and we cannot plan if we're constantly in freak out mode.
I'm not freaking out.
I wasn't,
I know that I will plant my gardens. I'm getting more chickens. My grandbaby is on the way, you know. I have, once winter passes, I'll be out more with my neighbors. But
that also,
it's more about big expenditures of money
ah,
right
okay,
now,
I see.
right?
Yeah.
It's more about like, no, you're not.
Mhm.
No, you're not going to take a chunk of money and put it on your floor, right?
When there's still a flaw there that
When
works.
there's still floor there, it's not great.
Yeah.
It's,
I
like
was
it's a
aiming
tripping
at your,
hazard.
yeah, that's true. I was aiming at your audience and
Yes,
especially those who feel very desperate right now because I was surprised that even knitters they contact me. I mean, I hardly ever post anything political on my blog, but or on my social media channels. But well, maybe I think I post little. But one wrote me when here things got nasty the last week in our election thing. They wrote me, "I'm just glad I can join your online circle, and I'm just sure um, the right wing isn't there." I was like, "Yep,
exactly. Exactly. Margaret, as always, such a pleasure to have you. Always a pleasure to talk with you. Can you
it was."
tell people where to find your yarn?
You find me at Alte Künste, which is ALTEKUENSTE.eu.
Right.
And
And you
I'm on Blue
still
Sky.
have ancient arts as the translated.
I think still have ancient arts, but there's a Canadian dyer also with the name of ancient arts,
Okay.
but she's not doing botanical dyes, so I kind of dropped the ancient arts part. We kind of started around the same time and weren't aware of each other.
Mhm.
But I think the ancientarts.eu leads you to me as well.
So if you're listening or watching, go to the website. Even if you don't knit, even if fiber arts are not your thing, please just go there and drink in the color. Just drink in the color. What Margit creates is so beautiful, and her colorways are just spectacular. So, where I'm living, the whole world outside is gray and white. It is a grayscale landscape from now until mid end of March. And so just seeing the pops of bright colors makes my heart happy, makes it wakens my cells and gives me a little dopamine hit, right? That we could all use right now. Find all the little dopamine hits off of social media, please, because that dopamine comes with poison, right? So find the dopamine in your life just to like calm your system and keep breathing. I just keep reminding people your body comes first. Take deep breaths. Find your butt in the seat. Get heavy. Make sure you're hydrated. Make sure you're resting. Turn off the news. You have to. We can't eat that all day long. We have to have a variety and make sure that you're eating uh, nutritious food. The body comes first. If you take care of the body, then the brain can work better. So that's just my repetitive message for weeks now is like get in your body, get settled in your body, take care of your body, and then your brain can work. Yeah. Margit, mwah, thank you so much.
Thank you for
Oh,
having me.